Oh, I guess it did go live right away. Welcome, everyone. We came on here a little bit about a minute earlier, waiting for people to join in and have. Got some feedback going there from you, Lauren. Check see what's going on with your mic there, real quick. I got you muted. So we came on here a little bit early to get things set up. Please, there's a section as far as where you can go ahead and put comments in. We'd love to hear from you. And as we get things going, let's see if we got that works out. Sounding a little better, Lauren, there. So welcome as we start to have people. So we're going to get going. It's 7 o'clock right now. Welcome, everyone, to compliance, talking compliance with Lauren. We're going to be doing this every Sunday at 7 Eastern live. So coming to you both from live on Facebook and on YouTube through our channel. So thank you for joining us here. Give you kind of a rundown as far as what our format's going to be is we're going to bring in a couple topics that Lauren has seen during the week, whether it's something that has to do with a news article that came out or something that's happening on a regular basis that she thinks is important to talk about. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we take your questions and we answer your questions about compliance with what's going on. So it's going to serve two purposes. The first one is to address current issues. Actually, I guess three purposes. First one is to address current issues that are happening out there in the industry. The second is to answer your questions as you have them, as they come up throughout the week. You can bring them here every week at 7 Eastern. And the third is to create a library of compliance topics that people who are getting into the industry or who are in the industry can source back to and be able to get some of their questions answered. So with that, why don't we go ahead and why don't we bring Lauren on here? Welcome. How are you doing?
Well, Bill, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm having a little audio problem, so if you could just speak up a little bit from the other room. We're in separate rooms right now, but I'm just going to wing it tonight. I'm doing well. Welcome, everybody. Perfect night to have audio problems on the very first night we're out here, but we'll make do.
Yeah, we scrambled a little bit, everyone. Actually, I was struggling coming into the weekend saying, what do I want to do? Go and buy a cheap little webcam to get Lauren set up. And then I learned that our cell phones have far better web cameras than what we have. I have to spend over $200 on a web camera. So we got Lauren's phone set up using it as a web camera, and we had a few little technical issues. We're still, as you can hear some buzzing, we got some issues going on there that we'll address before next week with some new mic and audio stuff going on. So, yeah, I'm glad we were able to make it even after the get set up during the playoff game. So, why don't we get started with something that I hear quite a bit from people out there, and especially with like new business partners or somebody I'm dealing with in insurance or something like that. They ask me, what is the most common mistake they see brand new authorities make as they're getting started?
My personal experience in this, it's pretty much new carriers just don't know what they don't know. I think it's sad personally that we make people study and test to get a CDL, but we don't make them study and test to become a carrier. And unfortunately, that leads to a situation, particularly with compliance and safety, where they just don't know what they don't know. So, for example, driver files. They may not know that they need to do a driver file and do drug testing and motor vehicle records and all the rest of that. The same with equipment files. Same with permit books that belong in the truck. It's just a lack of knowledge, and they don't know where to find the information. That's kind of my experience on it.
Yeah, because I mean, try going to the FMCSA and dig some of that information out. I mean, we've actually pulled a lot of information out. We give it to people because over the years, it's funny. We like our the reasonable suspicion training, the supervisor training. You stumble across that really bad video. And the information where people, instead of paying $100, $200 to somebody, they can actually get that for free if they just knew where to look, right? And that's easier said than done.
And Bill, that's going to be a whole nother, maybe next Sunday, we can start to talk about that information that's being sold out there that really is free and available for people to grab. Another topic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, one thing we talk about mistakes people make. I did a long, several weeks helping people get set up and webinars on how to get set up on the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. That's a whole other subject that's going on right now as it is, and we'll talk about that maybe here in a little bit. But one thing that struck me is the number of owner operators, independent owner operators, or small one-two truck people leased onto them that didn't know they had to be involved in a drug and alcohol testing program. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, it's sort of stunning to me to come to the realization again that particularly with these single owner operators that get their own DOT, their own MC, now they're running for themselves. They have no clue that not just the drug tests, but the application that they need to fill out on themselves, that they have to pull a motor vehicle record on themselves. None of this is really intuitive. In fact, it doesn't, on its surface, make sense. Why would I need to fill out an application on me? I certainly know enough about myself to know if I'm going to hire myself or not. I know whether or not I take any substances that I shouldn't. And I know what my driving record is. That's for darn sure. And if I don't, you sure remind me. At any rate, it is on its face confusing. The point is the regulation itself. The regulation says that you have to have a full driver qualification file on any driver that is being put behind the wheel of a commercial motor vehicle. Now that I've said that, you have to kind of separate yourself from being a company owner and a driver, because when you're an owner operator with a DOT number and an MC, you are both. So as both, the company owner needs to make sure that they qualify the driver. And the fact that they happen to be one and the same people, quite frankly, the regulators don't care.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's very little differences between the requirements for an independent owner operator and a carrier with multiple trucks on there. And what we're talking about as far as like drug testing. So the differences are you don't have to do it. The differences are you have to have a third-party administrator, consortium third-party administrator. You're required to be in a consortium as a single truck. Now, as two trucks, you could do it yourself. It'd be rather much more expensive doing it that way, but you could do that. I know when I started up, my carrier, my trucking company, when it was just me, I struggled with that as well. And it was as far as why do I need to do an application on myself? I'm going to hire myself. So it was a bit of a struggle there. It's interesting when I had my new entrant audit. This was back in the day when they actually sat down with you across the table, and you could really talk with them. And his point was, if something were to happen and I was not able to communicate, that they would be able to get their hands on my history and what had taken place. That was kind of their rationale between, why we're doing it. They're really looking to make sure that the person that's behind that wheel is qualified to be behind the wheel. So yes, you may be willing to hire yourself, but if you're not qualified, you can't show that you're qualified, then you should be behind the wheel. So regardless of if it's you or somebody else.
Bill, just to jump in on that, as the spouse of a driver who was an owner operator with his own DOT, I'm the one who would have been sitting in front of the lawyers and having to answer as to why you, who were laying there in a bed unable to speak, didn't have the driver file on yourself. So for your spouses out there of owner operators, this is for you too. This is for your protection.
Yeah. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit here. I know we're talking, so for everybody, you want to take a look at the drug and alcohol policies. It's part 40 of the regulations that you're looking at that spells it out, and it's very clear. And of all the complicated regulations out there, while there's a lot of detail, they're very, very clear as far as what the requirements are. There's not a lot of wiggle room or gray room in that. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, and as far as what are the requirements for some of the owner operators out there, as well as carriers going into that. And there's there's the regulations and how it's written, and then some of the things that have happened because of the technology issues. I guess we could both talk about that, but why don't you tell me as far as some of the things that you've been seeing out there with this?
And I'm sorry again. I'm having audio issues. I missed that last question.
Oh, just wanted to get your thoughts and your what you were thinking about as you've been seeing people coming into the clearinghouse and what they're having to say and what you're hearing from
what I'm dealing with the clearinghouse itself.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I'm a regulatory wonk, folks. I spend a good portion of my time researching and filling out papers and things like that. Because of that, I'm back and forth with the FMCSA almost all day long, it seems sometimes. Obviously, this rollout was pretty painful for everybody, and the FMCSA finally admitted they were in no way prepared for the amount of people that were going to come in and register toward the end of this whole process, hitting that January 6th date. Bill, I think you make the perfect analogy. It wasn't a deadline, it was an opening date. And maybe you can explain a little bit more what you meant by that, because I think that was such a great analogy when you did that webinar.
Yeah, so the one thing that was kind of interesting and I think it caused some of the problems, is that people thought that January 6th was a deadline. You had to be signed up and you had to be ready to go on January 6th. And that is really kind of what brought many of the problems coming into it as far as the technology standpoint, is the system was taking far more traffic in the last weeks coming into it, and definitely on January 6th, where not only the clearinghouse, but many of the FMCSA systems were down or very slow when it comes as far as on the website. So it was, people were rushing to get into it. Now, here's the requirements of what you have to do so people understand this with the clearinghouse, is you're required to, after January 6th, when you hire a new driver, you're required to query the clearinghouse. And I'm going to talk about, because of technology here in a second, what you're supposed to do. But so you're required, so if you hired a driver on January 6th, even though there's no information that has been entered in the clearinghouse yet, you're required to go to the clearinghouse to see if the driver had been entered into the clearinghouse or not at that stage. After that, you were required to every year do a what they call a mini query. You're supposed to go and see if the driver's information has been put in the system, and if the driver's name shows up, then you go and you have to do a full query as far as on the driver. So a full query when you hire, mini query once a year, full query if their name shows up when you're doing the update. So this is, I recommend to people is to plan on doing that mini query the same time you do the driver file, and you pull the MVR and you do your annual update. Now, if you're an owner operator, you're required to do the same thing as if you had a driver. So just like everything else, just like your driver file, run your MVR on a annual basis and run a mini query into the clearinghouse on a annual basis. Now, if you are already, let's say it's just you and you're not hiring anybody else, technically your deadline is not January 6th, 2020. Your deadline is January 5th, 2021. What I mean by that is you have to, within a year of the clearinghouse opening, you have to run a mini query on yourself within a year. So you have 365 days from January 6th to do that. You do not have to be signed up into the clearinghouse until that point. And that was the thing, I think, that a lot of people who have no need to use the clearinghouse right away, aren't hiring any drivers, don't have to do any checks on any drivers. And all these people, the ones who knew about it, were rushing to get that done. And that caused a bit of a problem there. So sorry, I knew Lauren's mic is giving us a little bit of a noise there. So I'm
just causing all kinds of problems tonight.
Yeah, we'll get it fixed for this next time. So the to come back into what we were talking about as far as with the problems. So I'm not going to go into all the problems that have taken place. Some of them were systems overloaded. Right now, there's a CDLIS connection issue happening there. But if you're hiring drivers and you haven't been able to get in and been able to run and work within the clearinghouse, do not worry. Continue to do the process like you've done in the past. And what you are required to do is once everything gets up and going, then you'll be required to continue to do that, and then also still run that query on the driver. Now, to that, let's talk a little bit about the driver file on that. So there's a couple of things you need to make sure that you have in the driver file when it comes to the clearinghouse. The first off, so when you hire a driver, because of FINRA, Fair Credit it's FINRA, Fair Credit and Reporting Act, I think it's
the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Yeah, Fair Credit Reporting Act. So just like running the drivers, there's MVR that you have to have that because that's where it falls into. This falls under the same regulations in terms of getting consent. So, but that is for the mini. As far as the full consent, what will happen is when you put their information in, you say, hey, I want to find out about Lauren in the clearinghouse that's in the clearinghouse. I want to find out what, if she's in there, what's going to happen is they're going to send an email to Lauren and they're going to say, hey, do you authorize Bill to check this? The driver is required to say yes. If the driver says no, the carrier cannot hire him. So the driver gives the approval and it comes back. So you don't have to get anything signed on that side of it because the system takes care of that. On the mini query, the once a year, the driver never knows about it. So what you want to do is you want to have when you're hiring, just like all the other documents that you have signed, you want to get them to sign off saying, yeah, I can go ahead and, or the carrier can go ahead and run the mini query on me, every year.
And do yourself a favor, folks. Don't make up your own forms. Okay, there are forms for all of this. All the forms have been pre-made by the FMCSA or the DOT. So if you need forms, we're great forms people. Let us know.
Yeah. So and we will be having. I haven't gotten that up there, but we will have that form set up. We already have it in our driver file system where it's an automated. So if you're working with us right now and you're hiring drivers, it's already taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about that. So
let's take care of Preacher here. Hey, Preacher.
Yeah, hi, Preacher. We got a question. As an owner operator with my own authority, do we have to sign up for it? And I'm guessing when he says for it, we're talking about the clearinghouse. And yes, you do, Preacher. You have to sign up for the clearinghouse as an owner operator with your own authority. And just like with your driver files, you have to run your MVR on yourself once a year. That's all you need to do at this stage is run a query on yourself once a year to see if anything's been reported on you, and you need to document that. So.
Yeah, Preacher, signing up for it. Bill did a great webinar, and I think you have them someplace somewhere. Maybe you can send Preacher one. But you're going to need your FMCSA portal PIN, which is confusingly different than your DOT PIN. And so if you run into struggles with that, let us know. Bill's pretty much an expert on this. I'm trying to avoid it as much as possible. He's the technical guru on the drug port, on the drug clearinghouse.
Once we get through the technology side, or I should say the IFTA side of things this year, she's not going to be able to avoid it because we're going to, assuming by February the FMCSA gets things handled, we're going to be starting working with all our clients, making sure that they get set up and ready to go. So we're going to be there. So thanks for your
thanks for the question, Preacher.
So we are at about 18 minutes in this, and we wanted to keep this between 15 and 20 minutes. So you have any final thoughts here, Lauren?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, the random polls and how the random polls have changed this year. One of the go ahead, Bill.
Oh no, I was agreeing with you. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the distinct changes that have happened in random programs this year is the jump of the pull rate from 25% of the pool on drug and alcohol. What did alcohol? No, drugs are 25% or 25%, and then alcohol was 10%. Drugs have now gone up to 50% pull rate, and alcohol is
10%.
10% still. Okay, so that has stayed the same. The reason this has changed is we had a 1% failure rate last year, and because of that 1% failure rate across the board, the DOT has changed the requirements now on the pull rate. So just be aware that your chances of getting pulled have gone up. Again, random programs are that. They're truly random. You can be pulled once a year, 10 times a year. It just depends on how big your pool is. yada, yada, yada. So just don't be surprised if you're hearing people talk about, wow, I'm getting pulled more often. It's just going to happen this year. Any comments on that, Phil?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you, Derek, for that comment. We
Thanks,
appreciate
Derek.
it. And yeah, I will just to close up on this, and anybody else if that's on here, if you have any questions for us right now before we get going, we'll stay on as long as people are asking questions. But to kind of comments that I see people make as far as about this, saying, the FMCSA, as far as just making these random changes again, this is not just a random change they made. When the drug and alcohol testing program came into place a couple of decades ago, this was something that was put into it. So basically it's automated. And this was actually not FMCSA.
I was going to say, this isn't FMCSA. This is DOT.
This is a DOT. So, air traffic controllers, school bus drivers, all the different groups that have different, we have the FMCSA.
Pilots.
On the trucking, everybody else, train conductors have their own group. But it was already mandated that if you get to that 1% level of failure rates in a year, so 2018, the industry hit that 1% rate. So that means automatically in 2020, that bumped it up as far as to the 50% testing rate. You're absolutely welcome, Preacher. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Preacher.
So that is something that automatically takes place and is happening out there as far as with the testing. So they really had nothing to do with it. I will say this is based on what we saw with the hiring practices, and there were a lot of drivers. I say this a lot, and you tell me if you agree or not, Lauren. There were a lot of drivers hired in 2018 that in a normal market never would have been hired any place. We had people. There are insurance companies that, well, if you pay enough money, we'll take anybody, right? And we had carriers paying $30,000, $40,000 a year insurance for a driver. If you're not aware, that's double what if we want to say a new carrier rate might see on a driver. So these are drivers that could not get qualified and get a job out there. So it doesn't surprise me where that we saw a higher failure rate in 2018.
And this is just a personal comment on my part, but after what I have seen happen in this past year in particular with driver shortages, people desperate to get drivers into trucks, plus what's going on with the drug clearinghouse, plus what's going on with the random pull rate, plus what we personally hear from our own carriers that we work with. We work with hundreds, but I'll tell you what, I will feel personally safer being on the road, knowing that drug clearinghouse is in place and knowing that random program has been jumped up, that pull rate has been jumped up just a little bit. Because I'll tell you what, if you sit in our chair, it can be a scary, scary place to sit. And I always wonder when I'm driving down the road next to particularly the semis, who's in there and what are they doing? So it's not a bad thing, folks.
And so people understand, we come from two different perspectives, not Laura and I, but as far as from a company, as far as two different perspectives. One is past owners of a carrier with 80 plus trucks that we had leased onto us. We actually, based on what we do, I can count on one hand. I don't think we ever had.
I'm trying to think if we ever had a failure. I don't think we did.
Failure as far as an active driver, but on one hand that we had people coming in for orientation that failed the pre-employment drug test on that.
Yeah.
Now, here's the scary part about that is, and this is what the clearinghouse is filling the gap on, is those drivers could come in on the clearing and take that pre-employment drug test, and they could fail it, and they could wait a couple weeks until it gets out of their system if they're able to, and go down the road and never mention that they tried to hire
the previous company. That's right.
And go ahead and get in the road. Now that report, the medical review officer or MRO is required to report it, and the carrier is required to report that. So
they've made this super airtight. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
And then on the other perspective is the fact that we own a drug consortium now. So we take a lot of tests. Those two different perspectives, we see a far different view as a drug consortium and working with hundreds of carriers than what we had as a carrier, because I mean, the guy how many different, I think he had the trifecta there as far as, I agree, Ray, There's one of our owner operators right there. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, I agree.
Hey,
It is
Ray.
everything. But thinking about that one guy who went off on the MRO, and
Oh yeah, we
he
had a driver who
had opioids, he had marijuana. I mean, he had, and he's going, why would I take this stuff? I mean, there's just
yeah. Note to self: if you ever have a doctor calling you saying that you failed a drug test, you probably shouldn't cuss him out. It's just not a good practice.
yeah, it's not going to change. He's not going to change his mind regardless. But that's
No. No.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. We're going to sign off and get going. Be sure you join us, every week here at 7 Eastern. Make sure you are letting people know about it. We'll be posting up more information and having a place where you can actually send us questions ahead of time, because there may be something that we want to put together, some information to share with people. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.